let's get right into it. My clients had to remove this tree, which they loved, and were able to salvage one piece, which you see here. They asked me to make some stuff, and this is one of the pieces of inspiration I was given. My buddy Tom at Lumbercycle agreed to mill this up for me. They do amazing work, by the way. I'll put a link in the description. And they cut it up into cookies. After that, we took it back to my place. My dad painted the ends, which seals it from wicking too much moisture. We stacked, stickered, banded it, and left it for about a year. After a little over a year of drying, you can see we have some cracking here, and took off the bark, stacked it up, ran it through the drum sander, and our moisture content is down to 11%. We're throwing in some epoxy, keep those checks in check, and to make sure that every surface is continuous. Once the epoxy is all set, it's on to the edge treatment. Then we move on to the template portion, which is probably the most tedious because I require 3 templates in order to make this piece because I've never made it before. So the first template is exactly what I want, but all the transitions and corners are really abrupt. You'll see this later on in the video. Here I am cutting out the template, which needs to be perfect because my final piece is going to be traced along this template that I make. So you see I take real care to line everything up, measure it perfectly, draw it perfectly, and really make sure that I cut exactly to the lines. Luckily, I have this sliding table saw, which allows me a lot of freedom and flexibility to make these patterns, which otherwise would be more time consuming and cumbersome. So I use several different tools and several different cuts to make these perfect, and I usually come by and finish them out by hand with a chisel or whatnot. So now that template number 1 is created, I start on template number 2, which is going to be my actual template. The first template was just a template for the template that I'm going to use. And then there will be a third template later on. We'll get to that. So this template gets cut out pretty rough because I'm going to run template number 1 against this big bit to cut out template number 2 perfectly. I switch my table saw into router mode, and here we go. So you can see template number 1 is riding on the bearing and template number 2 is getting cut out, which is going to give me those perfect radiuses that I wanted that I wouldn't be able to do had I just cut out the initial first template. And here I am using that template number 2 to make template number 3, which is what I use to lay out on my stock. All these do is take the guesswork out of cutting up the boards of the material that I'm using so that I don't accidentally cut something a little bit too small. So I quickly use those templates on some beautiful walnut and cut them out on the bandsaw. Once I have those rough cut, I joint one edge, which makes them nice and smooth and perfect for gluing. With the inside of those legs nice and straight, I can work on the cross braces. So these get marked, cut at the perfect angle, and ideally they just slip right in like that. Perfect. Cut the lower one, which is a little bit wider, and looks like we have a nice fit there too. Next up, I mark where the tenons are going to go, and here's a little close-up of a tenon, festool domino, and then get to cutting those tenons. It's just a nice elongated hole that the tenon can slip in. Really makes putting stuff together a breeze. After those are cut, I like to quickly assemble everything with the dominoes in place, see if this is going to glue up nicely. It passed the test, so I bust out the glue and make this permanent. This is a pretty easy glue up, and luckily the angle's not too crazy, so I can just clamp it straight. If the angle is too dramatic, the clamp as you close it starts to slip. So once that's cured, clean off the excess, which I've marked here using my template. And for the stuff where I can't use the bandsaw, I use this jigsaw. And where I can use the bandsaw, I do, because I like my bandsaw better than the jigsaw. Next, it's time to attach the template and clean up a little bit more in preparation for hitting it on the router table. I line up the router bit to touch the template only and get to it. This just trims off a little bit, but it makes it perfect to that template, which is why I take so much time and energy to make my template just right. So if you're wondering, this is my sliding table saw, which I'm using as a router table because it has a built-in shaper. It's by no means necessary to do this, but it sure is a joy to use. So I pull that off and we are looking really sharp. The next thing I have to do here is cut a couple pieces for the cross members that are going to join these two leg assemblies together. And you can see I pull out the domino again to put in those tenons and get a nice fit. Now that I got a nice little dry fit, I got to see what it looks like with the top on. Next up, I drill some holes to attach the bottom to the top and move on to the router again. This time I'm taking off the huge bit and I'm putting on a round over. This is going to give the legs just a nice refined look. I set that up so it just hits the corner and everything gets a nice little round over. I use this round over on a lot of things. It's my favorite size. 1/4 inch. Cutting boards, toy chest lids. It's just the all-around useful radius. Now because these legs splay out at 5 degrees, I need to trim the tops and bottoms at 5 degrees so everything lines up. You can see I use my sliding table saw with some clamps. Makes a quick job out of a relatively difficult task. So now we're doing a little dry fit to see how does everything really look now that it's all cut to size. And I think it looks really good. With everything cut to size, it's on to the final part, the sanding and finishing, which most woodworkers do not enjoy, but this is one of my favorite parts. I find it kind of therapeutic. I can zone out, just sit there and sand and watch the grain kind of come alive underneath all those scratches and mill marks. Oh, wait a second. I forgot. We haven't glued this up yet. So we're going to glue it up. But I do like to do a rough sand before I glue, so that I don't have to do all levels of sanding with it glued together. This Coast Live Oak was so hard. I had to sand these scratches out forever. And just look at, I'm taking this with 60 grit on a really coarse mode, and those scratches are just persisting. It took forever to sand those out. Not to worry, I won't have you watch the entire thing. It was really exciting to do a piece like this because this was a tree that grew in someone's yard for decades, and their kids played on it and they enjoyed it. And then when they had to remove it, it was like saying goodbye. But here, the tree lives on. They get to pass this down. They get to lives in their house. They enjoy it. I love projects like this, and this is the first one that I've ever done like that. I'd love to do more. I think there's something really cool about salvaging wood. Okay, here it is. Studio photography time, and there's the payoff. I think the walnut and the oak looks really good. The epoxy came out. I'm super happy with the stool, and the client's also very happy. So I think that's a win.